Pope Francis has been in the hospital since February 14th, since he's 88 years old and has had health problems in the past. Doctors have been keeping a very close eye on him. But despite his medical condition, he's not keeping quiet. He had broken his silence before his death and revealed a terrifying secret. But before I get into that, I need to bring you guys up to speed on what's happening to him. When he first went to the hospital a few weeks ago, he was struggling to breathe. Doctors found out he had pneumonia in both lungs, which can be really serious, especially for someone his age. What's even more concerning is the fact that at the age of 21, he suffered a severe respiratory infection that necessitated the removal of part of his right lung. This surgery was performed to address a serious infection, and he has since lived with a partial lung. So they put him on oxygen therapy and had him do special breathing treatments to help clear out his lungs. But things took a turn for the worse on March 3rd, when he suddenly had 2 episodes where he couldn't breathe properly. His lungs got clogged up with mucus, making it even harder for him to get enough air. Doctors had to step in fast. They performed procedures to remove the mucus and put him on a special breathing machine to help him recover. Luckily, he stayed alert the whole time and responded well to the treatments. As of now, Pope Francis is doing better, but still needs medical support. During the day, he's getting oxygen therapy, and at night, he wears a breathing mask to make sure his oxygen levels stay stable. He hasn't had any more major breathing issues, and his other organs, like his heart and kidneys, are working fine. But he's still not out of the woods, and doctors are being extra careful. Some people are wondering if Pope Francis will retire because of his health. He's spoken before about not wanting to extend life with extreme medical treatments, but so far, he hasn't shown any signs of wanting to step down. Despite everything, he's still dedicated to his role and wants to keep going as long as he can, and the world needs him to. That's because, unlike the popes that came before him, Pope Francis doesn't just talk about the devil. He warns that it's already inside the church, working from within. He calls it an elegant demon, a force that doesn't come with horns and fire, but in the form of influence, power, and carefully disguised corruption. Evil, in his eyes, isn't just about temptation, it's about deception. The worst kind of evil doesn't announce itself. It hides behind wealth, behind prestige, behind a mask of righteousness. This is where his words become dangerous. He isn't just talking about sin in a broad, spiritual sense. He's pointing directly at the Vatican. He's saying the devil isn't just lurking in the world, it's in the highest levels of the church itself. That's a terrifying statement coming from the Pope. Because if he's right, if evil has taken root inside the very institution meant to fight it, then who can be trusted? Not everyone wants to hear this. There are people inside the Vatican who have spent decades building their power in the shadows, and Francis has made it clear he sees them for what they are. By calling it out, he's doing more than making enemies. He's making himself a threat, and threats get eliminated. His warnings aren't just about morality, they're about survival. He's exposing a system that was never meant to be exposed, and those who thrive in secrecy aren't going to sit back and let it happen. The more he speaks, the more vulnerable he becomes. And in a place where power has always mattered more than truth, a pope who refuses to stay quiet might just be signing his own death sentence. The pope is playing a dangerous game, and the more he reveals, the more unsafe he becomes. Kind of like the time Pope Francis stirred up a storm with a controversial statement about hell during an interview on Italian television. In the interview, he said, "I like to think of hell as empty. I hope it is." He quickly added that this was just his personal opinion. But let's be honest, those words were far more than just a casual remark. How could he, of all people, question something so central to the faith? The Catholic Church has always been clear. Hell is real, and those who die in a state of mortal sin go there. The Catechism doesn't leave room for doubt, yet here was the Pope, openly denying that hell might even exist. This isn't just some theological debate, it's a direct challenge to centuries of church teaching. And I can't help but wonder, what does this mean for the millions who trust the church to guide them? The Pope, in my eyes, put his entire authority on the line with that one statement. Some people have tried to explain it away, bringing up Hans Urs von Balthasar's idea of the Dare We Hope view, suggesting that we can't know who will be saved. But even then, I can't shake the feeling that this is a dangerous game the Pope is playing. It feels almost reckless, like he's unraveling a key part of Catholic belief without considering the consequences. If hell isn't real, if no one is damned, what does that do to the moral structure that has guided generations? For me, it raises an even darker question. What if the Pope is right? If hell doesn't exist, then what is the point of all the rules and suffering? What happens to the eternal battle between good and evil? It's almost too much to process. The Pope's words weren't just controversial, they were a full-on challenge to the very core of Catholicism. He did the same thing when he opened the Holy Door. When Pope Francis decided to open the Holy Door for the Jubilee Year of Mercy, it didn't come without its share of controversy. I can't help but feel like he's always pushing the boundaries, and this act was no different. Traditionally, the Holy Door is opened only during a Jubilee, which is meant to be a special time of grace. But Francis, being the revolutionary he is, didn't just open it for the occasion. He made it clear that he was doing it for mercy and to welcome all people, regardless of their sins or background. He took that door, a symbol of strict tradition, and turned it into something that felt, to me at least, like a free pass. For some, this was a breath of fresh air, an invitation to a more inclusive church. But for others, it was outright sacrilegious. I felt the tension in the air as people debated the meaning of the Holy Door and what it symbolized. It wasn't just a physical door to a church, it was supposed to be a sacred boundary between those in the fold and those outside it. Opening it for everyone indiscriminately felt like it was blurring the lines of who truly belonged. I can't ignore the uproar from conservative Catholics who saw this as an erosion of the faith. The Holy Door wasn't just a ritual, it was a deeply symbolic gesture meant to emphasize penance, repentance, and the gravity of salvation. Pope Francis may have seen it as an act of compassion, but I think he knew it would shake things up. It wasn't just about opening a door. It was about changing the very way we see the church and the faith we've all been taught to uphold. And that's not where he stopped. He even supports something the churches of the world can't get behind.
You have said, who am I to judge? Homosexuality is not a crime.
No, it's a human fact.
Homosexuality. Pope Francis said something that's hard to ignore. In an interview, he called the criminalization of homosexuality unjust. The fact that he openly challenged those harsh laws, especially in countries where they still exist, was a dangerous move for someone in his position. Imagine being a pope, sitting on the Vatican's throne, and saying out loud that homosexual acts should not be treated like crimes. That's a risk I don't think anyone saw coming. It wasn't just a statement, it was a massive shake-up. He called out bishops who still supported such laws, telling them they needed a process of conversion. The implication was clear. Change your stance, or you're wrong. That alone was risky, almost reckless. Then he went further, talking about how being gay is a sin in the eyes of the church, but emphasizing that sin and crime aren't the same thing. That's a whole lot of people in high places who weren't going to be happy with him. Still, Pope Francis pushed ahead, opening a conversation I don't think the church was ready for. And now, the tension within the church is palpable, with forces pulling in all directions. It was bold, too bold, but he wasn't done with the topic yet. He ended up talking about the alleged gay lobby in the Vatican. At the midway point of one of the most critical Vatican meetings since the Second Vatican Council, uncertainty looms large among the nearly 300 participants, most of them celibate male clerics. The tensions inside the Vatican are palpable. Pope Francis, who has pushed for reforms within the Church, now faces fierce opposition from a group of powerful cardinals, many of them in key positions, who are determined to protect their careers and resist change. These conservatives see his reforms as a threat to the traditions they've long upheld. The Pope has warned of shadowy conspiracies and scandals that are creeping into church politics, with a new level of influence from what he calls lobbies. One shocking development during this meeting was the public outing of a gay priest just before the synod began, confirming the existence of a so-called gay lobby within the Vatican. For the first time, Pope Francis openly used the word gay in public, marking a significant break with past taboos. On the other side, reformers like Cardinal Walter Casper support Francis's push for more mercy, especially toward LGBTQ+ individuals and those seeking to remain in the Church. Still, these reforms are at odds with the deeply rooted conservatism of figures like Cardinal George Pell and Raymond Burke, who oppose any significant changes, particularly when it comes to same-sex unions and other controversial topics. This tension between conservatives and reformers has thrown the Church into chaos. The result is a fractured, uncertain path forward, with church leaders pushing for change and others desperately trying to hold the line. What happens next could redefine the future of the Catholic Church. You know, if there's anyone even left here, because he doesn't even want many Christians to be born. Pope Francis has never been one to hold back, but when he told Catholics they shouldn't have too many children, it set off a firestorm. In January 2015, during a press conference on his flight back from the Philippines, he shocked many by saying that Catholics don't have to breed like rabbits. Coming from a pope, that was a blunt, almost jarring choice of words, and the backlash was immediate. For centuries, the Catholic Church has preached that large families are a blessing, with artificial contraception strictly forbidden. So when the Pope suggested that responsible parenthood should be the goal instead of endless reproduction, many traditionalists were furious. It felt like a direct contradiction to the long-held belief that every child is a gift from God. Some accused him of undermining Catholic teachings, while others saw it as a rare moment of honesty about the realities of raising a family in modern times. Francis later clarified, saying he wasn't attacking big families, but encouraging parents to be thoughtful about their circumstances. But the damage was done. His words made people question whether the Church's strict stance on birth control was slowly softening, or if the Pope had once again spoken too freely, shaking the foundation of tradition in the process. While he was at it, he even thought up dirty money. Pope Francis has never been afraid to call things out. But when he said, "I wouldn't take dirty money," it was more than just a moral stance. It was a direct challenge to a system that has kept the Vatican running for centuries. The Catholic Church isn't just a religious institution, it's a financial empire. For decades, its inner workings have been tainted by money laundering, embezzlement, and secret transactions that never see the light of day. Billions of dollars move through its vaults, and not all of it comes from honest hands. So when Pope Francis made that statement, he wasn't just making a passing remark. He was calling out the people who have built their power on these financial dealings. He spent years trying to reform Vatican finances, shutting down shady accounts, demanding transparency, and attempting to clean up corruption. But the deeper he digs, the more enemies he makes. Because the truth is, there are people inside the Vatican who do take dirty money, and they don't like being exposed. His words were a warning. But here's the problem. When you start pulling at the threads of corruption in a place as secretive as the Vatican, you risk unraveling something much bigger. Francis may refuse to take dirty money, but what happens when the people who do decide he's becoming a problem? History hasn't been kind to those who disrupt power, and in the Vatican, power and money are inseparable. He's not just fighting corruption, he's making himself a target. And if there's one thing we've learned from the Church's past, it's that those who stand in the way of the system don't always last long. Amoris Laetitia controversy. Pope Francis knew Amoris Laetitia would be controversial, but even he might not have expected just how much of a divide it would create. Released in 2016, the document focused on family, love, and marriage. But one part set off a major crisis within the Church: his suggestion that, under certain conditions, divorced and remarried Catholics might be allowed to receive communion. For centuries, the rule had been absolute. If you divorced and remarried without an annulment, you were living in sin. That meant no communion, no exceptions. But now Francis was implying that there could be exceptions. Maybe a priest could decide based on personal circumstances. Maybe mercy mattered more than rigid rules. That idea infuriated traditionalists. Some of the most powerful cardinals in the Vatican, Raymond Burke, Carlo Caffarra, Walter Brandmüller, and Joachim Meisner, demanded that Francis clarify whether his position contradicted church doctrine. He ignored them. The divide grew worse. For conservatives, this wasn't just about one rule. It was about whether the Pope was leading the Church down a dangerous path. If the Church could bend here, where else could it bend? Was doctrine being rewritten? Was the Pope changing the faith itself? The controversy hasn't faded, but that's something he doesn't mind. Neither does he mind getting down to the ground for what he believes in. Pope Francis has never been one to follow tradition for tradition's sake, but what he did in April 2019 left the world in disbelief. In an unprecedented act, he knelt down and kissed the feet of South Sudan's rival leaders, pleading with them to hold on to peace. South Sudan had been trapped in an endless cycle of war, with President Salva Kiir and his former deputy-turned-rebel leader Riek Machar locked in a violent power struggle. The country's civil war had killed nearly 400,000 people and displaced millions. Even after signing a fragile peace deal, there was no guarantee it would last. Trust was non-existent, and tensions were still boiling under the surface. Everyone knew the agreement could fall apart at any moment. So, in a move that stunned even the Vatican, Francis got on his knees before these men with blood on their hands, men responsible for a war that tore their country apart, and he kissed their feet. It was something no pope had ever done before. A pope is a world leader, a figure of immense power. And yet, here he was, humbling himself before politicians, begging them not to return to war. His voice was filled with urgency. "Stay in peace. I am asking you with my heart." You could hear the exhaustion, the sorrow, the desperation in his words. This wasn't a carefully staged diplomatic move. This was a plea from a man who knew that if these leaders failed, more lives would be lost, more suffering would follow. But not everyone saw it as a noble act. For some, it was shocking in the worst way. These weren't just politicians, they were warlords. They had ordered killings, fueled destruction, and allowed their country to fall into chaos. To some, kneeling before them wasn't humility. It was giving legitimacy to men who should be held accountable for their crimes. It blurred the line between mercy and absolution. Still, that moment remains one of the most unforgettable of Francis's papacy. Whether or not his plea made a difference, one thing was clear. He was willing to break every expectation, even humiliate himself, if it meant even the slightest chance of stopping the violence. Although some things he says goes completely against what everyone else has ever talked about. Like other religions. He said, all religions are paths to God, and it wasn't taken very well. For centuries, the Catholic Church has stood by the belief that salvation comes only through Jesus Christ. But Francis, in his push for interfaith unity, suggested something very different, something that left many Catholics outraged. His statement, made during a 2024 visit to Singapore, wasn't just a passing remark. He was speaking about religious diversity and the importance of coexistence when he said that every religion offers a way to reach God. To some, this sounded like a message of peace, an attempt to bridge the divide between faiths. But to others, It was a direct contradiction of the Church's core belief that Jesus is the only way to salvation. The backlash was immediate. Conservative bishops and theologians accused him of promoting relativism, the idea that all beliefs are equally valid. To them, this wasn't just an issue of interfaith dialogue. It was heresy. The idea that Catholicism is just one of many paths, rather than the path, struck at the heart of what they believed the Church stood for. Some even questioned whether Francis was rewriting doctrine right in front of their eyes. The Vatican later tried to do some damage control, clarifying that Francis wasn't denying Christ's role in salvation, but rather emphasizing respect for all faiths. But it was too late. The Pope had once again placed himself at odds with the more rigid factions of the Church, and his statement continued to cause concerns that he was leading Catholicism into dangerous, uncharted waters. And as nice as he seems, he has his moments of snapping too, especially if people get too close. Pope Francis has always been unpredictable, but two moments stand out where he had to get away from his own supporters. The first happened in March 2019 at the Holy House of Loreto in Italy. As a long line of Catholics approached him, many tried to kiss his papal ring, a centuries-old tradition symbolizing respect for the Pope's authority. But Francis kept yanking his hand away every time someone leaned in. The footage quickly went viral, and the reaction was immediate. Was he rejecting Catholic tradition? Was this an act of humility? Some were furious, calling it disrespectful, while others thought he was simply trying to avoid the spread of germs. The Vatican later claimed hygiene was the issue, but for many, the message was already clear. Pope Francis was once again challenging old customs in his own way. Then came a much more dramatic moment on New Year's Eve 2019 in St. Peter's Square. As Francis greeted a crowd, a woman suddenly grabbed his hand and yanked him toward her. Visibly annoyed, he slapped her hand away and scowled before walking off. It was a rare, raw moment, one that showed the Pope's very human frustration. Some sympathized with him. After all, no one, not even the Pope, should be aggressively pulled by a stranger. But others saw it as unkind, saying he should have shown more patience. These two moments weren't just about physical gestures. They became symbols of how people view Francis. Some see a pope who breaks unnecessary formalities, while others see a man disregarding sacred traditions and acting impulsively. I mean, he's literally said that he didn't even want to be the pope. He said multiple times that he didn't want the job, that he never imagined himself leading the Catholic Church. But perhaps the most telling moment came in 2019, when he flat out said, "I didn't want to be Pope." It wasn't just an offhand comment. He explained that after Pope Benedict XVI stepped down in 2013, he was so sure he wouldn't be elected that he even had plans to return to Argentina. But when the votes started coming in, reality hit. He had no choice. The Church had chosen him, and as he described it, "I accepted because I believe that God wanted it." For some, this made him seem humble, someone who didn't seek power but took on the responsibility out of duty. But for others, it raised an uncomfortable question. If he never wanted to be Pope, how invested is he in the role? And when you look at the moments where he physically pulls away, yanking his hand back from Catholics trying to kiss his ring, slapping away a woman who grabbed him, his reluctance feels even more obvious. He doesn't seem to enjoy the rituals, the formalities, or even the personal space violations that come with the job. Maybe that's why he's been so unpredictable. He never fought for this position, and he doesn't seem too concerned about keeping everyone happy. Whether it's breaking traditions, rejecting Vatican luxury, or making statements that throw the Church into chaos, he leads his way. And if that bothers people, well, maybe that's the point. Has his constantly controversial statements and actions finally caught up to him? Could that be the real reason he's in the hospital right now?